Pick one wife, the other will be executed now. That's the order shouted on a dusty gallows in a frontier town. A plain Amish man, known for his peace and silence, is dragged before the crowd and forced to make an unthinkable choice. Two women stand with ropes at their necks, one a proud native widow, the other a young immigrant carrying an unborn child. The deputy laughs, the sheriff sneers, and the church bell tolls as the noose tightens. But when the moment comes, this man does something no one expects. His decision shocks the entire town and ignites a fight against the most powerful railroad men in the West. Because one woman carries a deed that could save the valley's water, and the other hides a secret that could destroy the syndicate's grip on the land. As fire consumes barns, bounty riders thunder in the night, and a baby's cry hangs in the balance, the town holds its breath. Will a man of peace find the courage to protect them both, or watch as everything he loves is crushed beneath the noose? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dry Creek's dusty Main Street, as Samuel Yoder guided his horse through the restless crowd. The clip-clop of his mare's hooves echoed against the weathered wooden buildings, barely audible above the angry murmurs of the gathered townsfolk. Two more horses, tied to his lead rope, followed behind him like faithful shadows. The tension in the air was as thick as summer storm clouds. Samuel's plain black hat and simple clothes marked him as different, drawing sideways glances and whispered comments. But it was the crude wooden gallows that made his stomach turn. There, silhouetted against the setting sun, stood two women bound with rough rope. One woman held herself tall and proud despite her bonds. Her dark eyes blazed with quiet defiance. Taya, the Comanche widow whose husband's death still stirred whispers in town. Beside her stood Eliana Muller, her face pale with terror, her body trembling. The German immigrant's shoulders were hunched, as if trying to shield the slight swell of her belly from the hostile crowd. Well, if it ain't the peaceful man himself. The deputy's voice cut through the murmurs like a rusty blade. He swaggered forward, whiskey fumes surrounding him like a cloud. Come to trade them fine horses, have you? Samuel's hands tightened on his reins. That was my intention, yes. The deputy's bloodshot eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. Well now, seems like the Lord sent you just in time for some real important business. He gestured broadly at the two women. See, we got ourselves a situation here. A Comanche woman who won't give up her water rights, and a German girl who's brought shame on decent folk. His voice dropped to a stage whisper. Though word is, she had some help with that shame. Samuel felt the weight of every eye upon him. The crowd pressed closer, their boots scraping against the packed dirt. Some faces showed disgust, others excitement, but too few showed mercy. These ladies need a husband to keep them in line, the deputy continued, patting his gun belt. And since you're a widower. He let the words hang in the air like smoke. I do not understand, Samuel said carefully, though his heart pounded with understanding all too clear. The deputy's face twisted into an ugly smile. It's simple enough, even for a plain fellow like you. Pick yourself a wife. Right here, right now. The other one. He jerked his thumb toward the noose. Well, she won't be needin' any husband. Horror rose in Samuel's throat like bitter water. This is not right before God or man. Ain't about right or wrong. The deputy spat into the dirt. It's about law and order. These women are causing trouble, and you're going to help solve it. He drew his revolver, spinning the cylinder with deliberate slowness. Pick one wife, or the other swings now. Samuel's gaze met Taya's. Her chin was lifted, eyes fierce with dignity. Then he looked at Eliana, saw how she cradled her unborn child, tears streaming down her face. The crowd's bloodthirsty murmur grew louder. The deputy waved his gun impatiently. Time's wastin', peaceful man. Make your choice. Samuel's mind raced like a spring flood. His wife Sarah's face flashed before him, her gentle smile as she'd quoted scripture about doing right in the face of evil. The memory of her death from fever still ached, but now it strengthened his resolve rather than weakening it. The setting sun painted the gallows blood red. Samuel could feel sweat trickling down his back beneath his simple shirt. The deputy's gun gleamed dully, promising violence. But violence wasn't the only power in the world. Samuel knew that bone deep, the way he knew the feel of soil between his fingers and the weight of prayer in his heart. He looked again at the two women. Taya stood like an oak tree in a storm, unbending. Eliana trembled like an aspen leaf, but her hands never left her belly. Both of them deserved to live. Both of them deserved justice. And Samuel knew, with a clarity that felt like sunrise, that he couldn't choose between them. Not this way. Not with death as the price. The deputy raised his gun. Last chance, peaceful man. Pick one, or I pick for you. Samuel drew a deep breath, steeling himself against the waves of hostility rolling from the crowd. His hands trembled, but his voice rang clear across the town square. Both are mine, my wives. The words fell like stones into still water. For a heartbeat, the entire gathering stood frozen. Then whispers rippled through the crowd, rising to a shocked murmur. Women clutched their shawls closer, men spat into the dirt, and children stared wide-eyed at the plain-dressed man who'd just claimed 2 wives. The deputy's face twisted in disbelief. Now hold on just a minute. The law states that a man can claim his wife from custody. Samuel continued, his quiet voice carrying surprising authority. You asked me to choose. I have chosen. Sheriff Brewer shouldered his way through the crowd, his badge glinting dully in the fading light. You can't marry 2 women, Amish man. That ain't Christian. Yet you would hang an innocent woman? Samuel met the sheriff's gaze steadily. Which law matters more, man's or God's? The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun belt. Behind him, Samuel could see men in fine suits, railroad men, watching with predatory interest. Their presence explained much about this cruel spectacle. The women are under my protection, Samuel declared. By your own words, deputy, they need a husband to keep them in line. Here I stand. The sheriff and deputy exchanged glances, trapped by their own twisted logic. The railroad men whispered among themselves, their faces dark with calculation. Fine. The sheriff spat finally. Take your heathen wives and get out of my sight, but don't think this is the end of it. Samuel dismounted slowly, his legs unsteady from tension. He approached the gallows, aware of every hostile eye following his movements. With careful hands, he untied first Eliana, then Taya. The German woman immediately clung to his arm, her tears soaking into his sleeve as she whispered, Danke, Danke, over and over. Taya stood on her own, rubbing her chafed wrists. Though bruises darkened her face, she held her head high. Her eyes met Samuel's with a measuring look that held neither gratitude nor contempt, only careful assessment. 2 wife heathen, someone shouted from the crowd. Others took up the cry, their mockery following Samuel as he led the women toward his horses. Abomination! Devils got the plain folk now. Shame on you all, Samuel murmured, but only the women heard him over the jeers. The sun had set by the time they reached the livery stable. Samuel paid for 1 night's lodging with precious coins he'd meant for seed. The stable boy brought fresh hay for his horses, casting nervous glances at Taya before scurrying away. In the relative privacy of the stable, Samuel shared out his traveling bread, watching as the women ate. The single lantern cast dancing shadows on the rough walls. Neither woman had spoken much during their walk from the gallows, but now the silence grew heavy with unspoken words. Taya broke it first. You should know why they wanted to hang me. She reached into her dress and withdrew a folded paper, holding it carefully away from the lantern's flame. My husband left me this before the railroad men killed him. A deed to water rights in the valley. They've tried bribes, threats, and now this. Her voice held bitter pride. I will not sell. Samuel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Water meant power in this dry land. Power the railroad desperately needed for its steam engines. Eliana's soft voice quavered in the lamplight. And I must tell you. Her hands crept to her belly, protective. I carry a child. The railroad foreman, he promised marriage, but fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. When he learned I was with child, he disappeared. The town calls me unclean. The railroad men, they say I bring shame to their company. Samuel's heart ached for both women, one targeted for what she owned, the other for what she carried. Both caught in the railroad's ruthless path toward profit. "You are safe now," he said quietly, though he wondered how true that was. The railroad's reach was long, and its memory longer. Taya's expression showed she shared his doubt. "Safety comes with a price, Samuel Yoder. Are you prepared to pay it?" Before he could answer, a horse whinnied outside, and all three tensed at approaching footsteps. The lantern flame guttered, throwing wild shadows across their faces as they waited to see what new threat the night would bring. The first hints of dawn painted the stable's weathered beams in pale gold. Samuel knelt on the hay-strewn floor, his Bible open before him. The familiar words of Psalm 23 brought comfort as they had so many times before. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." A soft rustling drew his attention. Taya sat cross-legged near the stable door, watching him with thoughtful eyes. Eliana still slept, curled beneath Samuel's spare blanket, her face peaceful for the first time since yesterday's ordeal. Samuel closed his Bible gently. "We should leave before the town wakes." They hitched the horses to his wagon with quiet efficiency. The early morning air carried a bite of autumn chill as they set out, leaving Dry Creek behind. Samuel's team pulled steadily along the rutted trail, their hooves raising small clouds of dust that drifted behind them like pale ghosts. Taya perched on the wagon seat beside Samuel, her sharp gaze constantly scanning the rocky hills that lined their path. Every so often, her hand would stray to the water deed hidden in her dress, as if reassuring herself it was still there. In the wagon bed behind them, Eliana hummed a soft German hymn, her voice barely carrying over the creak of wooden wheels. "How far?" Taya asked, breaking a long silence. 3 miles, Samuel replied. "My place isn't much, but it's peaceful." The sun climbed higher as they traveled, burning away the morning mist. Finally, they crested a gentle rise, and Samuel's homestead came into view below. The plain wooden house stood square and solid, if weather-beaten, with a stone chimney rising from its shake roof. A barn listed slightly to one side, its red paint faded to a dusty rose. Beyond stretched 10 acres of fenced pasture, green with late summer grass. "Gott sei Dank," Eliana whispered, making the sign of the cross. Samuel helped both women down from the wagon, then unhitched the horses. "The house needs work," he admitted, noting loose shingles on the roof. "But it's dry inside, and the well has sweet water." Inside, the house was simply furnished but clean. Samuel had maintained his late wife's orderly ways, though a fine layer of dust covered everything. While he fetched water and firewood, the women explored their new shelter. By mid-morning, Samuel was on the roof, hammering loose shingles back into place. The steady rhythm of his work was punctuated by the clatter of pots from the kitchen below, where Eliana had discovered a cache of cornmeal and dried beans. The aroma of baking bread soon drifted up to him, making his stomach rumble. From his perch, Samuel could see approaching neighbors long before they reached his property. The widow Henderson rode past on her dappled mare, her face pinched with disapproval. Later, the Miller boys drove their cattle down the road, pointing and whispering. Samuel kept working, letting their judgment slide off him like rain. When he finally climbed down, he found Taya in the dooryard, spreading wet quilts over the fence to air. She had already gathered late summer herbs from the overgrown kitchen garden, laying them out to dry. "Your neighbors have many opinions," she observed dryly. Samuel nodded. "They mean well, most of them. They just fear what they don't understand." "Like Indians? And Germans?" Her tone held a sharp edge. "Like any folk different from themselves." Samuel agreed quietly. "It's fear that makes men cruel." The sun was setting when they gathered for supper around Samuel's sturdy oak table. Eliana had produced a feast from simple ingredients: golden cornbread, savory beans with wild onions, and herb tea sweetened with honey. The food's warmth and the lamp's gentle light made the kitchen feel almost homelike. After they'd eaten, Samuel opened his Bible. His finger found the familiar passage from Isaiah: "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." As he read, Samuel glanced at his unlikely family. Taya sat straight-backed, her expression thoughtful, as she absorbed the unfamiliar words. Eliana had her hands clasped, tears sliding down her cheeks, but her face showed peace rather than distress. "I don't understand your God," Taya said when he finished. "But I understand protecting the weak. My people have stories about such things." "Ja," Eliana whispered, wiping her eyes. "God has brought us to shelter, like the sparrow finds her nest." Samuel closed the Bible carefully. Outside, crickets chirped in the gathering dusk, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage through the open window. Here under his roof, 3 strangers had begun to form something like family. Fragile as a bird's nest, perhaps, but built of faith and shared work and simple trust in God's provision. They still faced dangers, the railroad's greed, the town's judgment, winter's approach. But for now, in this moment, they had found refuge. The morning sun beat down on Samuel's wagon as it rolled into Dry Creek. Dust swirled around the wooden wheels, coating everything in a fine powder. Taya sat tall beside him on the wagon seat, while Eliana huddled in the back, her shawl drawn close despite the heat. The general store's bell jangled as they entered. Inside, the familiar scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco mingled in the dim light. Conversation died. Every eye turned to watch them. Samuel kept his focus on their needs. 2 sacks of flour, he said quietly to Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper. "And salt, if you have it." Peterson's lips tightened beneath his mustache. "Might be fresh out." "There's 6 sacks right there," Taya pointed out, indicating the shelf behind him. The shopkeeper's face reddened. Before he could respond, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Henry Peterson, you stop that foolishness right now." Widow Martha Carson stepped forward from between the dry goods shelves. Her faded calico dress couldn't hide her dignity, nor her stern expression. "These folks' money's as good as anyone's." Peterson cleared his throat, suddenly busy with his ledger. "Yes'm. 2 sacks, you said?" While Samuel counted out coins, Martha slipped extra packets of sugar and tea into his order. "For the ladies," she whispered with a quick wink. "My Robert, rest his soul, always said kindness matters more than gossip." Samuel nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, Mrs. Carson." Outside on the boardwalk, 3 well-dressed men blocked their path. Railroad men, Samuel knew at once, recognizing the sharp suits and harder eyes. The tallest stepped forward, a silver watch chain glinting across his vest. "Quite the household you're running, Mr. Yoder," he drawled. "Mighty peculiar for a God-fearing man." "Our business is our own," Samuel replied evenly. "Business?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Speaking of business, that water deed your Indian friend holds." "I am Comanche," Taya interrupted. "And the deed is not for sale." The man spat, brown tobacco juice landing near Taya's feet. "Deed won't do you much good when..." The sharp rap of a wooden crutch on boards cut him off. Jonas Cutter stumped forward, his Union Army jacket worn but neat, his left leg missing below the knee. "Having trouble with these fine folks?" Jonas asked, his voice carrying clearly down the street. "Because I reckon any man who'd threaten women in broad daylight might need reminding about civilized behavior." The railroad man's hand twitched toward his coat, but Jonas just smiled a hard smile that spoke of Chickamauga and worse places. "Careful now," Jonas continued. "Town's got enough eyes watching. Wouldn't want any unfortunate stories reaching the territorial marshal, would we?" After a long moment, the railroad man stepped aside. His companions followed suit, though their glares promised this wasn't finished. "Appreciate the assistance," Samuel told Jonas as they loaded the wagon. Jonas shrugged. "Seen enough bullies in my time. Besides," he grinned, "watching those dandies back down made my day." His expression sobered. "You watch yourselves, though. Railroad types, they don't forget easy." The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought. As they unloaded supplies, Eliana suddenly gasped, pressing a hand to her belly. "What's wrong?" Samuel asked, steadying her. "Just pains," she whispered. "From worry, I think." "The baby." Taya guided her to a chair. "I know herbs that will help. Samuel, fetch water from the well." While Samuel worked the pump handle, he could hear Taya speaking softly to Eliana in the kitchen. By the time he returned with a brimming bucket, Taya had already laid out dried leaves and roots from her medicine pouch. "Willow bark for pain," she explained, measuring carefully. Chamomile to calm the spirit. My grandmother taught me these ways. Samuel watched as she steeped the herbs, then helped Eliana sip the bitter tea. Gradually, the young woman's face relaxed, her breathing steadied. As sunset painted the kitchen walls gold, Samuel knelt beside his chair. The women joined him, Taya out of courtesy, Eliana from habit. Lord, he prayed, guide us through these trials, protect the innocent. His voice caught. Grant me wisdom to guard those in my care. Opening his eyes, Samuel saw the burden he carried reflected in Taya's knowing gaze. She understood responsibility, the weight of others' lives. Eliana's gentle touch on his shoulder carried trust he prayed he could deserve. The evening deepened around them, crickets beginning their nightly song. In town, threats and danger waited. But here, in this moment, they had found a measure of peace and unexpected allies in their fight for justice. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at Samuel's homestead. Dawn found him in the fields, his plain black hat bent against the morning sun as he guided the plow horse between rows of young corn. The rich earth turned beneath the blade, releasing the scent of promise and possibility. Taya ranged the hills each morning, her knowledge of plants turning the harsh landscape into a healer's garden. She returned with her gathering basket full of yarrow, sage, and wild mint. Sometimes she spoke softly in Comanche to the herbs as she dried them, sharing wisdom passed down through generations. In the house, Eliana's presence brought new life to rooms long silent since Samuel's wife passed. The scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen, and her quiet humming accompanied the sweep of her broom. Though her movements grew more careful as her belly swelled, her gentle industry never faltered. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the yard, hoofbeats approached the house. Samuel looked up from mending harness to see Reverend Josiah Hale riding up, his circuit preacher's coat dusty from the trail. Evening, Brother Yoder, the Reverend called, dismounting stiffly. His normally cheerful face was drawn with concern. Might we speak privately? Samuel nodded, leading him to the barn where lantern light cast long shadows among the rafters. The horses shuffled in their stalls, lending privacy to their conversation. Railroad men were asking about you in town today, Reverend Hale said without preamble. Making threats. They mean to burn you out, Samuel. Force you off the land so Taya's water rights become worthless. He gripped Samuel's arm. I fear for your safety, brother. Samuel's hands stilled on the leather strap he held. Violence is their way, not ours. I know your beliefs, Samuel. I respect them, the Reverend's voice softened. But I also know God sometimes calls us to stand firm against evil. David faced Goliath with nothing but faith and a sling. And what does the good book say about protecting the stranger and widow? Samuel asked quietly. That we must. Reverend Hale smiled. Which is why I came to warn you, and to say you have friends in town, more than you know. The railroad's grip is loosening. People are beginning to question. I am grateful for your warning, Samuel said. Will you stay for supper? The Reverend accepted, and soon, they gathered around the worn oak table. Eliana had set out her best efforts. Cornbread still warm from the oven. Beans seasoned with wild onions Taya had gathered. Preserved peaches from Samuel's cellar. Before they ate, Reverend Hale offered grace, his words carrying extra weight in light of his warning. Lord, protect this household. Grant them strength in adversity, courage in trial. Guide those who would do harm to see your light. Amen. As they passed the simple dishes, Samuel spoke carefully. Our community faces a choice, he said. Whether to bow to fear or stand together. The railroad men think themselves mighty, but they are few. We are many. The people talk, Reverend Hale agreed. They remember how the railroad cheated Widow Carson of her grazing rights, how they drove off the Martinez family when copper was found on their claim. But will they stand? Taya asked, her dark eyes intent. Or only talk? Change comes slowly, the Reverend admitted. But it comes, like water wearing away stone. After the Reverend rode away into the gathering dusk, they sat long around the table. The lamp cast a gentle glow as Samuel read from his Bible, the familiar words bringing comfort. Later that night, Samuel was almost asleep when a soft knock came at his door. "Come in," he called, sitting up. Eliana entered, wrapped in her shawl. In the moonlight through the window, her face showed tracks of tears. "I had a dream," she whispered, "about the baby. In the dream, it grew up alone, without a father's guidance. Her hand cradled her growing belly. I fear that will be true, that my shame will mark the child forever." Samuel's heart ached at her distress. "No child will lack shelter under my roof," he promised firmly. "Nor guidance, nor love. This I swear before God." Fresh tears spilled down Eliana's cheeks, but her smile was grateful. "You are a good man, Samuel Yoder. Thank you." She slipped away, leaving Samuel to ponder the weight of his pledge. He had spoken not as a husband, though he knew town gossip painted him as such to both women, but as one called to guard those in need. Just as his faith taught, just as his heart demanded, whatever the railroad men planned, he would meet it with the quiet strength that had sustained his people through generations of trial. Through the thin walls, he heard Taya speaking softly to Eliana, offering comfort in her practical way. The sound of their voices, one strong, one gentle, reminded him he was not alone in this stand. Together, they would face whatever came. The Sunday morning sun cast long shadows across Dry Creek's dusty Main Street as Samuel's wagon approached the white-painted church. His team's hooves clopped steadily on packed earth, drawing curious stares from townsfolk already gathering on the wooden steps. Taya sat straight back beside him on the wagon seat, her dark hair neatly braided, wearing her best dress of deep blue cotton. In the back, Eliana smoothed her gray skirts nervously, one hand resting on her growing belly. Samuel guided the horses to a halt near the hitching post. "The Lord gives us strength," he said quietly, helping both women down. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they climbed the church steps together. Inside, the pine pews creaked under shuffling feet as people turned to stare. Samuel led the women to an empty bench near the back, but heads kept swiveling their way. The railroad men occupied the front row like they owned it, their fine suits a sharp contrast to the farmer's Sunday best. Reverend Hale stood at the pulpit, sunlight streaming through plain glass windows behind him. His eyes met Samuel's with a slight nod before he opened his Bible. "Today we read from Luke, chapter 10, the Reverend began, his voice filling the small sanctuary. "The parable of the Good Samaritan." His gaze swept the congregation, a story of mercy shown to strangers when those who should have helped turned away. The railroad men shifted in their seats as Reverend Hale described the beaten traveler, left for dead beside the road. His words grew pointed when speaking of the priest and Levite who crossed to the far side, choosing not to see suffering before them. But the Samaritan stopped. Reverend Hale declared, though despised by others, he showed true neighborly love. He bound wounds, offered shelter, paid the innkeeper to care for a stranger. He paused. What does this teach us about mercy? About seeing the humanity in those society rejects? Samuel felt the weight of stares on their bench. Beside him, Eliana ducked her head while Taya met the look steadily. The message was clear to all. The Reverend challenged them to choose between railroad money and Christian charity. After the final hymn, people filed out into the sunshine. Samuel stood waiting while Eliana and Taya gathered their things. A man approached hesitantly. Carl Mueller, the railroad foreman's brother, his smith's apron exchanged for clean shirt and suspenders. "Fräulein Eliana," Carl said softly in German. "Might I speak with you? Privately?" Eliana glanced uncertainly at Samuel, who nodded encouragement. She followed Carl to a quiet corner near the bell tower, while Taya watched protectively from a distance. "I am shamed by my brother's actions," Carl said, his voice rough with emotion. "He betrayed not only you, but our family's honor." He twisted his hat in calloused hands. "I would help, if you permit it. My wife and I, we have a spare room if you ever need shelter, and I would gladly be uncle to the child." Tears welled in Eliana's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your kindness means much." Their moment was broken by heavy boot steps. Sheriff Brewer swaggered up to Samuel, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Enjoying your little family, Yoder?" He spat near Samuel's feet. "Next time you won't save them." Railroads got plans for that water spring, and no plain-dressed farmer's going to stop progress. Samuel met his gaze calmly. The Lord will provide. The Lord ain't here, Brewer sneered. But I am, remember that. He stomped away, spurs jingling. The ride home was quiet at first, each lost in thought as the wagon rattled over rutted earth. The late morning sun beat down on their backs while meadowlarks called from fence posts along the trail. Finally, Taya spoke. "My husband died at that spring," she said, her voice carrying old pain. 2 years ago. Railroad men came at night, tried to force him to sign away our rights. He refused. She touched the deed paper hidden in her dress pocket. They shot him there, where the water meets stone. Left him for the coyotes. Eliana reached forward to squeeze Taya's shoulder. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. "But his death will not be empty," Taya continued. "That spring has watered my people's horses for generations. It feeds the valley in dry times, keeps cattle alive when other streams fail. I will not let them take it." Her chin lifted. "My husband died protecting our land. I would do the same." Samuel nodded slowly. The sheriff's threat echoed in his mind, along with Carl's unexpected offer of help. The lines were being drawn ever clearer, between those who served money and those who served justice. God's path was rarely easy, but it was always clear to those who looked with honest hearts. He clicked to the horses, guiding them around a bend where his homestead waited ahead. The conflict could not be avoided now, but neither was he alone in facing it. That knowledge steadied him like a rock in troubled waters. The gentle rhythm of late spring settled over Samuel's homestead like a warm quilt. Each morning, the sun painted the eastern sky in streaks of pink and gold, calling them to another day of shared purpose. 2 weeks passed in peaceful measure, marking time with the sprouting corn and the steady work of many hands. Samuel stood in his doorway, watching the new corn leaves pushing through dark soil in neat rows. The sight brought a quiet satisfaction he hadn't felt since Rachel's passing 3 winters ago. Back then, grief had hollowed him out like a dried gourd. Now, unexpected joy filled those empty spaces. In the kitchen garden, Taya knelt beside Eliana, showing her which plants could ease morning sickness. Her strong hands moved with certainty among the herbs, picking leaves and explaining their uses in her measured way. Eliana listened intently, one hand resting on her growing belly, while the other carefully gathered the plants Taya indicated. "This one," Taya said, holding up a sprig of mint, "settles the stomach. Steep it with chamomile when the sickness comes." She demonstrated how to strip the leaves, her movements precise. "My grandmother taught me these things, as her grandmother taught her." Eliana nodded, trying the technique herself. "Like this?" "Yes, just so." Taya's rare smile warmed her face. "You have good hands for healing work." Their laughter drifted to Samuel on the evening breeze, a sound that made his heart lighter. Even the house itself seemed to welcome their presence, the rooms growing warmer with shared meals and quiet conversation. At night, they gathered around the table while lamplight cast friendly shadows on the walls. "Tell us another story," Eliana would ask, setting fresh bread before them. Sometimes, Taya shared tales of her people's heroes, or Samuel recalled funny moments from his Pennsylvania childhood. Their words wove together like threads in a blanket, creating something new and strong from separate pieces. One morning, Samuel found 3 loaves of fresh-baked bread waiting by the gate, still warm from unknown ovens. Small hands had pressed wildflowers into the crusty tops, children's work, done in secret kindness. He recognized the gesture for what it was, silent support from town families who couldn't speak openly against the railroad men. "God provides through unexpected vessels," he said softly, carrying the gift. And inside, Eliana's eyes grew bright with tears when she saw the flowers, while Taya touched the loaves with gentle reverence. That evening, they shared the bread with their supper, savoring both its taste and its meaning. The kitchen filled with warmth from the cookstove, while outside, purple shadows lengthened across the yard. Samuel read from his Bible as was his custom, the familiar words bringing comfort. "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." Yet even as peace bloomed within the homestead's boundaries, danger prowled its edges like hungry wolves. Samuel noticed them first, riders on the distant hills, sitting their horses too still, watching too long. They appeared at odd hours, sometimes at dawn, sometimes as dusk painted the sky copper and rose. He said nothing at first, not wanting to trouble the women. But Taya saw them too. Her sharp eyes missed little, and her shoulders would tense slightly whenever hoofbeats echoed from the far slopes. "They watch," she said one evening, standing beside Samuel at the fence. "Like coyotes before they strike." Samuel nodded, looking toward the hills where dust still hung in the air from the latest observers. "They mean to frighten us first." "Yes," Taya's voice held steel. "But we are not easily frightened, are we?" "No," Samuel agreed. "We are not." Inside, Eliana hummed an old German lullaby while she kneaded dough for tomorrow's bread. The familiar sound floated out to them, carrying memories of distant homes and the promise of new beginnings. Samuel breathed deeply, drawing strength from the earth beneath his feet and the knowledge that right paths, though hard, were always clear to those who walked in faith. The riders would come again tomorrow, he knew, would keep coming, testing their resolve like wind testing fence posts. But for now, this moment held its own kind of victory. 3 people from different worlds, building something true and strong together. The corn grew straight and green in the fields. Herbs flourished under careful tending, and laughter brightened the evening air. Samuel turned toward the house, where lamplight spilled golden from the windows. Whatever storms gathered on the horizon could wait. This night belonged to peace, to bread warm from the oven, to stories shared in fellowship, to the simple blessing of a home filled with hope instead of loneliness. The midnight air shattered with shouts and thundering hooves. Samuel jerked awake to orange light flooding his bedroom window. His heart stopped as he recognized the demon dance of flames against the darkness. The barn was burning. He burst from the house, bare feet striking cold dirt, nightshirt whipping in the hot wind. The barn's wooden sides were already engulfed, fire crawling up the walls like hungry fingers. Inside, horses screamed in terror. "Dear Father, give me strength," Samuel whispered, then plunged toward the inferno. Heat slammed his face as he shouldered through the door. Smoke clawed his lungs. Through watering eyes, he saw his horses rearing against their ropes, white showing all around their terror-struck eyes. The mare closest to him kicked her stall in panic. "Easy, girl, easy," he soothed, forcing his movements to stay slow and steady despite the crackle of flames overhead. The rope burned his palms as he worked the knot free. He led her toward clean air, heart breaking at her frightened whinnies. Behind him, Taya's voice cut through the chaos. "Samuel, the well." She and Eliana had already formed a bucket line, passing water from hand to hand. Eliana's nightdress was soaked with effort, her pregnant belly outlined against the wet fabric as she worked. Neither woman had hesitated to help, despite the danger. Samuel returned again and again into the burning barn. Each time the heat grew worse, the smoke thicker. His lungs felt scraped raw. Sweat and soot streaked his face, but he wouldn't leave a single animal to burn. With trembling hands, he freed the last calf, urging it toward safety. The roof groaned. "Samuel, get back," Taya shouted. He stumbled clear, just as burning timbers crashed down where he'd stood moments before. The whole structure was engulfed now, flames reaching toward heaven like grasping hands. Their bucket line was useless against such fury. Through the roar of fire, hoofbeats sounded on the road. Samuel turned to see riders silhouetted against the flames, watching from a safe distance. Their laughter carried on the wind, cruel and mocking. Then they wheeled their horses and disappeared into the night, leaving destruction in their wake. Samuel sank to his knees in the dirt. The animals he'd saved huddled together in the pasture, trembling. Eliana kept working the well pump, though her arms must have ached, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. Taya stood like a statue, watching the barn burn with eyes hard as flint. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose that seemed to mock their loss. The barn was nothing but smoking ruins now. Blackened beams jutted from ash like broken bones. The sweet hay Samuel had stored for winter was destroyed. Tools, tack, feed, all gone. The crunch of wheels on gravel announced an unwelcome visitor. Sheriff Brewer sat high in his saddle, regarding the destruction with poorly hidden satisfaction. "Terrible accident," he drawled, touching the brim of his hat. "Shame about your barn, Yoder. Might want to be more careful with your lanterns in future. There was no accident." Taya's voice could have frozen water. "You know who did this?" The sheriff's face hardened. "Careful, woman. Accusations without proof are dangerous things." He turned his horse, calling over his shoulder, "Better clean this mess up before it attracts vermin." Samuel watched him ride away, feeling the weight of helplessness press down like a physical thing. Without the barn, winter would be brutal. His animals would suffer. The railroad men knew exactly how to hurt a farmer, destroy his ability to protect his livestock. The morning sun climbed higher, heating the ashes at his feet. Samuel's throat tightened with grief and exhaustion. Everything he'd built, reduced to cinders in a single night. His hands still burned from the ropes, his lungs ached with every breath. But giving up wasn't an option. Not with 2 women depending on him. Not with an unborn child to consider. Samuel knelt in the smoking ruins of his barn. Ash dusted his bent head like gray snow as he whispered, "Lord, grant me strength to meet this trial. Show me the path of righteousness when darkness surrounds us." Eliana's soft steps approached. She laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort. On his other side, Taya stood straight-backed and proud, her presence a reminder that they faced this together. The morning breeze carried away wisps of smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark began to sing. The morning after the barn burning dawned clear and crisp. Samuel's muscles ached as he worked to salvage what he could from the ruins. Every few minutes, his gaze drifted to Taya, who knelt in her herb garden, carefully selecting plants for her healing pouch. The sight of her methodically working, refusing to let fear rule her actions, gave him strength. "I need more yarrow," Taya announced, rising and dusting off her skirts. "The wild patches grow thick near the creek bend." Samuel paused his work, worry creasing his brow. "Perhaps wait until I can ride with you?" Taya's chin lifted. "The creek is just past the next rise. I have walked these lands since before you came, Samuel Yoder." Her voice softened. "Eliana needs the yarrow for her pains. I will return before midday." He watched her stride away, straight-backed and proud, before returning to his task. Eliana hummed as she hung washing on the line, her gentle voice carrying on the breeze. The morning passed slowly, measured in salvaged nails and sorted lumber. The peace shattered with Eliana's scream. Samuel dropped the charred beam he'd been examining. Eliana ran toward him, her face white with terror, one hand pressed against her swollen belly. She stumbled, catching herself against the well. "They took her!" Eliana gasped between ragged breaths. Men on horses they grabbed. Taya dragged her away. Her voice broke. "I saw from the ridge I ran." She doubled over with a cry of pain. Samuel's heart thundered. He caught Eliana as her knees buckled. "Where? Which way?" "Toward town." Tears streamed down her face. "Samuel, the baby, something's wrong." He lifted her in his arms, her slight weight trembling against his chest. Inside the house, he laid her gently on his bed. Her face was gray with pain, hands clutching her middle. "Stay still," he urged, though everything in him screamed to mount his horse, to chase after Taya. But Eliana's next cry of distress decided him. He couldn't leave her like this. Samuel's hands shook as he gathered the herbs. Taya had taught him to use chamomile for calm, raspberry leaf for the womb. He steeped them in hot water, praying he remembered the proportions correctly. While the tea brewed, he placed cool cloths on Eliana's forehead. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "If I hadn't run so hard." "Hush now. You did right to warn me." He helped her sip the tea. "Rest. Breathe slow and steady." The sun crept across the floor as Samuel tended her. Each hour that passed was an hour lost in finding Taya, but he couldn't abandon Eliana while she might lose her child. He read Psalms aloud, his voice rough with worry, while shadows lengthened across the bedroom walls. Gradually, Eliana's pain eased. Her breathing steadied, though tears still leaked from her closed eyes. "The baby has settled," she murmured. "But Taya, I know." Samuel's hands clenched in his lap. "God help me, I know." Darkness fell like a shroud over the homestead. Samuel lit the lamp, its weak light unable to push back the crushing weight of night. He slumped in his chair beside the bed, defeat pressing down on his shoulders. 2 women had trusted him for protection, 2 lives placed in his care. Now one lay suffering in his bed while the other faced heaven knew what torments in town. His own words echoed back to him. No child will lack shelter under my roof. Yet here he sat, powerless to shield either woman from harm. The railroad men had known exactly how to break him, force him to choose, knowing he would stay with Eliana. Now they had Taya, and with her, the water rights they coveted. His vow of peace felt like chains binding his hands. Samuel bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "I have failed them both." Eliana's fingers brushed his arm. "No," she said softly. "You chose as your heart guided you, as Taya would want you to choose." Her hand pressed against her belly. "You protected 2 lives today, not 1. But her words, meant to comfort, only deepened his anguish. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Samuel imagined Taya alone among her enemies, perhaps thinking he had abandoned her. The thought was a knife in his chest. He rose to check on the horses, needing to move, to do something. The night air was sharp with coming frost. Stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, as God's mercy seemed in that moment. Samuel stood in the ruins of his barn, surrounded by the ashes of his simple life, and felt the weight of his powerlessness nearly drive him to his knees. From the house, he heard Eliana's soft weeping. In town, Taya faced her captors alone, and Samuel Yoder, who had dared to shield them both, could protect neither. The night pressed down, heavy with despair. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pale gold as Samuel mounted his horse. He had tended to Eliana through the night, watching her finally drift into exhausted sleep just before sunrise. The morning air bit cold against his face as he urged his horse toward town, his plain black hat pulled low against the chill. Hoofbeats echoed off the empty buildings as he rode down Main Street. Most shops remained shuttered, though lamplight glowed in the saloon where night crowds still lingered. The sound of hammering drew him forward, each strike like a blow to his heart. There, in the town square, 3 men worked by lantern light. Fresh timber lay scattered around them as they rebuilt the gallows. Samuel's horse shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. One of the workers glanced up, then quickly looked away. "Ain't it a fine morning?" Sheriff Brewer's voice dripped with satisfaction. He emerged from the shadows, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "Seems your Indian woman had some papers we needed to examine. Mighty suspicious, them being forgeries and all." Samuel's hands tightened on his reins. "You know they're legal documents." "Do I now?" The sheriff grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Trial's set for noon, though I reckon she might not last that long. Away, she's been refusing to sign over them water rights." Behind him, 2 railroad men in fine suits watched from the boardwalk, cigarette smoke curling around their satisfied smiles. Samuel recognized the calculated cruelty in their eyes. They had orchestrated this entire affair, using the sheriff as their weapon. Samuel dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. "Where is she?" "Jail ain't receiving visitors." The sheriff patted his gun. "Best ride on home to your German girl. Hear she ain't doing so well neither." The threat in his voice was clear. Samuel turned to the gathering crowd of townsfolk starting their morning routines. He recognized faces from church, from the mercantile, from passing on the road. Good people, he had thought. People who sang hymns on Sundays and helped neighbors in need. "Will none of you speak against this injustice?" His voice carried across the square. "They mean to hang an innocent woman for refusing to surrender what is rightfully hers." A few heads bowed. Others hurried past. The ranch widow who had helped them at the mercantile wouldn't meet his eyes. Even Jonas, the veteran who had defended them before, only shook his head sadly and turned away. "Ain't no one fool enough to stand against progress," one of the railroad men called out. "That spring water's meant for the iron horse, not some savage's cattle." Samuel felt the weight of their fear, their silence, their acceptance of evil done in daylight. He thought of Taya in her cell, proud and unbending. Of Eliana at home, saved by the very herbs Taya had gathered and dried with such care. Turning his horse, he rode home through the brightening morning. The sun climbed higher, warming his back, but couldn't touch the cold knot of worry in his chest. At the homestead, he found Eliana awake, pale but steady. The herbs she left, Eliana said softly, holding up a leather pouch. They saved us both, the baby and me. She knew she must have known something might happen. She prepared everything we would need. Samuel sat heavily in his chair by the hearth. His late wife's Bible lay open on the table where he'd left it the night before. He ran his fingers over the worn pages, remembering Sarah's voice reading these same passages in their Pennsylvania home. Violence begets violence, she used to say, but faith can move mountains that force cannot budge. He read the marked passage, words she had underlined. Be strong and of good courage, fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee, he will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Samuel closed the Bible gently. Sarah had faced her own battles with illness, yet never lost her belief that truth would prevail over darkness. Now Taya faced death with similar courage, refusing to bow to evil despite its cost. They expect me to fight, he said quietly. To come charging in with guns like some dime novel hero. That's the kind of resistance they know how to defeat. Eliana watched him from her bed, one hand resting protective over her child. What will you do? Samuel stood, straightening his plain black coat. What my faith demands. I will stand in the light and speak truth to power. His voice strengthened with conviction, not with weapons or threats, but with the courage to name evil for what it is and trust in God's justice. He began gathering what he would need, not guns or ammunition, but proof and witnesses. The time had come to fight not in shadow, but in the clear light of day, where all could see the truth of what was happening in their town. The sun climbed toward noon as Samuel prepared, his path now clear before him. He would meet this challenge not with the sheriff's violence, but with a different kind of strength, the kind that could shine light into darkness and awaken sleeping consciences. Samuel's boots kicked up dust as he walked Main Street, his steps measured and deliberate. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings. He found Jonas first, sitting outside the telegraph office, his wooden crutch propped against the wall. Thought you might come looking, Jonas said, working a piece of tobacco in his cheek. Been thinking on what happened this morning. Ain't sitting right with my conscience. Samuel settled onto the bench beside him. The town fears the railroad's power. Power? Jonas spat into the dust. I seen real power at Chickamauga. Weren't money or threats that won that day. Was men standing together, shoulder to shoulder. He gripped his crutch, knuckles white. I may be short a leg, but I still got my voice. And by God, I aim to use it. Relief warmed Samuel's chest. Tomorrow at noon, then? I'll be there. Jonas thumped his crutch against the boardwalk. Reckon there's others who need reminding what courage looks like. Samuel's next stop was the cluster of modest homes where the ranch widows lived. He found them gathered on Martha Webb's porch, mending clothes in the fading light. They listened intently as he explained his plan. Bread, you say? Martha's weathered face creased in thought. Showing charity right there in the square? A reminder, Samuel said quietly, of how we're meant to treat our neighbors. The women exchanged knowing looks. We'll bake through the night, Martha decided. Nothing speaks louder than breaking bread in public. Shows folks whose side the Lord's on. As Samuel turned to leave, she caught his arm. That German girl, she holding up? She's stronger than she looks. Martha nodded. Tell her we're praying. And Samuel? She pressed a wrapped loaf into his hands. You ain't alone in this fight. The smithy's forge still glowed as Samuel approached. Carl stood in the doorway, his face troubled in the red light. The man's shoulders were bowed with more than physical labor. I heard about Taya, Carl said, wiping soot from his hands. My brother, he swallowed hard. What he did to Eliana, and now this? It ain't right. Your testimony could sway many, Samuel suggested gently. Carl's eyes met his. Reckon it's time I spoke truth about what the railroad's doing. About my brother using them girls like they weren't even human. He straightened. I'll stand with you tomorrow. Tell everything I know. The church stood silent against the darkening sky. Samuel found Reverend Hale in his study, lamplight pooling around his desk. The preacher looked up from his Bible as Samuel entered. I've been praying on this, Reverend Hale said without preamble, wondering if staying neutral was the same as enabling evil. He stood, his conviction visible. The bell in that tower? It's called folks to worship for 20 years. Tomorrow it'll call them to witness. It might cost you your position, Samuel warned. Some prices need paying. The Reverend's voice was firm. That bell will ring until every soul in Dry Creek has to choose, stand with justice or with tyranny. Night had fallen completely when Samuel finally returned toward home. The moon cast silver light across the prairie, making the grass ripple like water. His heart felt lighter despite the weight of tomorrow's task. Inside the homestead, a single lamp burned. Eliana sat at the table, her face peaceful as she worked on mending one of Taya's shawls. She looked up as Samuel entered, reading the quiet hope in his expression. "You found help?" she asked softly. Samuel settled into his chair, muscles aching from the day's walking. "More than help. Found people willing to stand for what's right." He told her about each ally: Jonas with his soldier's honor, the widows with their bread and prayers, Carl facing his family's sins, and Reverend Hale with his bell. "Tomorrow I will walk unarmed," he said, "but not alone." Eliana reached across the table, gripping his hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. "Vater unser I am Himmel," she whispered, beginning the Lord's Prayer in her native tongue. The familiar words flowed like water, German and English mingling in the quiet room. The lamp flickered, making shadows dance on the walls as night pressed close around their small haven. Through the window came the lonely call of a whippoorwill, a single voice raised against the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but for now, they had this moment of peace, of prayer, of hope built on the foundation of community courage. Samuel looked at their joined hands in the lamplight, his weathered from work, hers gentle but strong. Like the town itself, he thought. Separate fingers, finding strength in coming together. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, as Samuel stood before his mirror, straightening his plain black coat. His fingers traced the worn leather of his Bible, then carefully folded Taya's water deed, placing both in his breast pocket. The weight of them pressed against his heart, like a reminder of what was at stake. Eliana watched from the doorway, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "Let me come with you," she pleaded. Samuel shook his head gently. "You must stay safe here. The baby needs you strong." The morning air carried the scent of sage as Samuel's horse clip-clopped toward town. Prairie grass swayed in the breeze, and meadowlarks called from fence posts, but his mind stayed fixed on what lay ahead. The deed's edges pressed against his chest with each hoofbeat. Dry Creek emerged from the morning haze like a painting coming into focus. Already, people gathered in knots along the boardwalks, their voices hushed and urgent. The newly rebuilt gallows cast its stark shadow across the square. Samuel dismounted near the church, his boots raising small clouds of dust. He could see Taya standing proud despite her bonds, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. The sight of her gave him strength. Sheriff Brewer lounged against the gallows post, tobacco juice staining his beard. Behind him, the railroad men stood like crows in their black coats, watching Samuel's approach with cold eyes. "Well, if it ain't the peaceful man," Brewer drawled, drawing snickers from his deputies. "Come to watch justice served?" Samuel's voice carried clear across the square. "I've come to speak truth." He withdrew the Bible and water deed, holding them high so sunlight caught the papers. "If either of these women die today, the railroad loses every drop of water in this valley." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Samuel unfolded the deed, its official seal visible to all. "This document, signed and witnessed, grants all water rights from Shadow Creek to Thunder Basin to Standing Elk and his heirs. Taya is his widow, his legal heir." The railroad men shifted uneasily. One stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That deed's worthless. Indian contracts don't hold in white courts. This one does." Samuel's quiet words carried authority. "It bears the territorial governor's seal, every signature legitimate, every word binding." Above them, the church bell began to toll, its deep voice rolling across the rooftops. Reverend Hale stood in the bell tower, pulling the rope with steady determination. The sound drew more townspeople from their homes and shops. Jonas stumped forward on his crutch, his veteran's metal glinting. "Ain't just the deed that's legitimate, it's the principle. We fought a war to end treating folks like property." The ranch widows emerged from the crowd, Martha Webb at their head. They carried baskets of fresh bread, breaking loaves to share. "Our Lord fed multitudes," Martha called out. "He didn't ask for papers first." Carl pushed through to stand beside Samuel, his forge-scarred hands clenched. "My brother, the foreman, he used these women cruel. Railroad's been stealing land, threatening folks, burning out honest farmers. I've seen it all." The crowd pressed closer, faces showing anger now instead of fear. A child darted forward to untie Taya's bonds, while the deputy stood uncertain. Sheriff Brewer's hand dropped to his gun. "This is illegal assembly. Clear the square, or what?" Jonas interrupted. "You'll shoot us all? Hang the whole town?" He thumped his crutch against the boardwalk. "Railroad don't own this valley. People do." The bell tolled on as more voices joined the chorus of dissent. Samuel saw faces he recognized: the storekeeper, the blacksmith, farmers from outlying homesteads. The crowd swayed like prairie grass in a storm wind. But now their movement was purposeful, surrounding the railroad men. "The deed stays valid, only if Taya lives," Samuel reminded them, his voice carrying over the bell's song. "Kill her, and you lose everything you came here to steal." The railroad's lead agent assessed the angry faces, the growing crowd, the determined set of Samuel's jaw. His smile turned sour. "This isn't over," he spat, but his retreat had already begun. Sheriff Brewer found himself suddenly alone as his deputies melted away. He backed down the gallows steps, trying to maintain dignity. "Y'all are making a mistake," he blustered, but no one seemed to hear. Taya stood free now, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had bitten. She moved to Samuel's side, her head high. The morning sun caught the silver at her temples, making it shine like a crown. The bell's voice faded to silence, but its echo seemed to linger in the square. Samuel looked at the faces around him, neighbors who had found their courage, a community choosing justice over fear. His quiet voice carried to every ear. "The real deed we hold is to each other. That's what makes a town worth fighting for." Martha Webb pressed a loaf of bread into Taya's hands. Jonas steadied himself on his crutch to offer a respectful nod. The crowd began to disperse, but something had shifted in Dry Creek, like earth after rain. Something had taken root. Sheriff Brewer's swagger crumbled as angry voices rose from every direction. Men who had laughed at Samuel's plain ways now pressed forward, fists raised against the lawman's corruption. "Cut her loose," demanded a cattle drover who days ago had mocked Taya in the street. "We've seen enough of your railroad justice." Carl pushed to the front, his smith's apron still dusted with forge smoke. "My brother Wilhelm seduced Eliana with false promises, then fled when she carried his child. The railroad paid his way west, covered up his crime." His voice broke. "I won't stay silent while more innocent blood stains this town." Jonas raised his crutch high, the wood gleaming in the morning Sunday. "I didn't lose this leg, fighting rebels just to watch rich men crush poor folks under their boots." His war medal flashed as he jabbed a finger at the sheriff. "You're no better than the slavers we fought." Sweat beaded on Brewer's forehead as he looked from face to face. Gone was the fear that had kept townsfolk quiet. In its place burned righteous anger, hot as Carl's forge. With trembling hands, the sheriff drew his knife and slashed the rope binding Taya. The railroad men, seeing their puppet cut loose, backed away from the crowd's fury. Their polished boots scraped through dust as they retreated to their waiting horses. "This town's done taking your orders," someone shouted, and others took up the cry until the syndicate men spurred their mounts and galloped away. A cry of pain cut through the celebration. Eliana stood at the edge of the crowd, doubled over, face pale. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Samuel and Taya rushed to her side. Together, they helped her into Jonas's wagon. The wheels rattled over rutted streets as they raced back to the homestead. In Samuel's kitchen, Taya worked swift and sure, brewing the herbs she had taught Eliana to gather. Steam rose from the cup as she pressed it to the younger woman's lips. "Drink, sister," she murmured. "This will calm the little one." Samuel knelt beside the bed, his calloused hand gentle on Eliana's brow. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "for protecting all my family today." Sheriff Brewer's badge lay abandoned in the dust of the square, while in Samuel's home, 3 hearts beat strong with newfound hope. 3 weeks after the showdown in town, the sound of hammering filled the morning air. A dozen neighbors worked together, raising new timbers for Samuel's barn. The fresh-cut pine gleamed golden in the sunrise, as men who once shunned the unusual family now labored alongside them. Inside the homestead, Taya moved with practiced grace, gathering dried herbs from rafters while watching Eliana nurse her newborn son. The baby, just 5 days old, had his mother's fair hair and rosy cheeks. His arrival had brought joy to their home, his first cry echoing off the walls like a hymn of thanksgiving. "He grows stronger each day," Taya observed, her dark eyes soft as she placed fresh feverfew and chamomile in her basket. "Like his mother." Eliana smiled, adjusting the blanket around her son. "Thanks to your wisdom with the herbs, and Samuel's constant prayers." The afternoon light streamed through windows. As Taya ventured out to check her medicine garden, while Eliana tended the hearth, the baby sleeping peacefully in a cradle Samuel had carved. The rhythm of their days had found its own harmony, each person contributing their gifts to their shared home. As evening settled over the valley, Samuel lit the lamp and opened his Bible. The familiar creak of chairs brought his family together around the worn oak table. Taya sat tall and dignified, her presence a reminder of strength through adversity. Eliana cradled her son, her face glowing with new motherhood. Samuel's deep voice filled the room with words of gratitude. No marriage bonds tied them together, yet something stronger had grown, a family forged in faith and mutual respect. Through the open window came the gentle toll of the church bell, ringing out across the peaceful dusk. Its clear notes carried no warning now, only the sweet sound of community restored and hearts at rest. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.